What kind of truth makes a son quietly swap his father's drink on Christmas Eve and then promise a shocking truth the next day? How did my own daughter-in-law decide I was just an old fool she could drug for laughs, only to watch her whole image and future collapse when my son and I calmly showed everyone what she had really been planning for me? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Peter Hale, and if you asked most people in my family to describe me, they would probably say I am the quiet one who fixes things and tries not to make trouble. I am 66 years old, a widower, and after 40 years working as a school maintenance man, I know how to listen more than I talk. Pipes, wires, boilers, old doors, scared kids in hallways. I learned long ago that problems often make noise before they break, and if you pay attention, you can stop a lot of damage. The sad thing is that in my own family, I ignored the noise for far too long. On the Christmas Eve, when everything changed, I stood on the sidewalk in front of my son's house and watched my breath float in the cold air. The lights around his roof blinked in neat lines, and the big front window showed a warm picture. A tall tree with gold ribbons, my granddaughter Emma's paper star on top, and shadows moving back and forth as people walked through the living room. I held a small gift bag in my hand with a book inside and a little craft set Emma had once pointed at in a store. My fingers were stiff from the cold, so I took one long breath, told myself to smile, and walked up the path. When I rang the bell, I heard Emma shout that Grandpa was here, and that sound alone was enough to soften the knot in my chest. Mark opened the door with that tired smile I knew too well. He told me everyone was already there, and that dinner was almost ready. His voice sounded cheerful, but there was a tightness around his eyes, the same tightness I had noticed more and more when he was with Anna. I stepped inside, hung my coat, and smelled roasted turkey and cinnamon. The house looked like a holiday card, with candles on the mantel and matching stockings with names sewn on. One stocking had my name too, but it hung a little lower, as if someone had added it at the last minute. In the kitchen, Anna moved like she owned the world. She wore a dress that looked new and expensive, and her hair was perfect, not a strand out of place. She saw me and smiled the kind of smile that shows teeth but not warmth. She told me I was just in time, and then said to the group that the whole family had managed to gather, even the one who always got lost in time. A few people laughed politely. I felt my face grow warm, but I nodded and said I was glad to be there. Anna's parents, Ralph and Denise, sat on stools near the counter, sipping drinks and watching everything like judges in a small court. They greeted me, but I could feel their eyes sliding up and down my simple sweater, probably comparing it in their heads to Mark's new shirt and Anna's dress. Emma ran in, hugged my legs, and pulled me toward the living room to show me the presents under the tree. That part felt good and pure. She did not care about who owned what or who looked important. She only cared that I was there and that we would later build the toy house she hoped to find under the paper. While she spoke, I glanced back toward the kitchen and saw Anna watching us, her mouth pressed in a thin line for a second before she turned away and started opening bottles. I pretended not to see that. I had been pretending not to see a lot of things that year. When Anna called everyone back to the kitchen to fill their plates, I took my place near the edge of the big island, where I always stood. She moved through the crowd with a tray of glasses, some filled with wine, some with sparkling juice. She liked to make a little show of being the perfect hostess. I watched her pour, and that is when I noticed something that made the hair on my arms stand up. She reached into a drawer, took out a small bottle the size of a travel shampoo, and held it low, half hidden by the counter. Her eyes flicked around quickly to see who was watching. Most people were busy talking. I was not. From where I stood, I saw her twist off the cap and tip a few drops into one specific glass. Her mouth curled slightly on one side, almost like a private joke with herself. Then she shook the glass gently, set the little bottle back into the drawer, and slid the glass onto the tray near the edge closest to where I usually sat. A normal person might say I imagined it, that maybe it was just flavoring or something harmless, but I had worked around cleaning supplies, medications, and chemicals for decades. I knew the difference between a casual gesture and a secret one. My stomach tightened. For a moment, I thought about speaking up, but the room was full of relatives, and Emma's laugh floated in from the living room. I told myself I might be overreacting, that maybe it was nothing, that maybe that small bottle was some kind of syrup. At the same time, I remembered the way Anna had told a friend once, when she thought I was not listening, that it would be funny to see what happened if she spiked my drink with something and recorded my confusion for her followers. She had said it was only a joke, but the look in her eyes then had not been kind. As Anna lifted the tray and carried it to the living room, my son Mark stood by the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her. His face had that flat, careful look he often wore when trying not to show emotion. Anna set the tray down on the coffee table near the sofa, where I always sat on the end. People reached for glasses, chatting about work, weather, and holiday plans. I hesitated, my hand half extended. Then I saw Mark move. It was a small movement, so smooth that most people would not have noticed. As Anna turned to adjust a decoration on the mantel and Ralph made some loud comment about holiday traffic, Mark stepped forward, slid his fingers around 2 stems, and swapped the places of 2 glasses on the tray. The one that had been closest to my usual seat now sat near Anna's place, next to the armchair where she liked to sit when she made speeches. The other glass, clear and untouched, moved to my spot. He did it like a man who had rehearsed a simple trick, all in one breath. Our eyes met for a second. There was something hard in his gaze, something that said he had seen more than I realized. He did not say a word. When Anna turned back to the room, she clapped her hands softly and told everyone it was time for the Christmas Eve toast. She talked about how blessed they were to have a warm home, a growing child, and a family that supported them. I stood there holding my new glass, the clean one, listening to a woman list blessings while I knew she had just tried to put something into my drink. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. I had spent years learning how to look steady in front of broken things. Everyone lifted their glasses. I saw Anna reach for hers without looking closely, too focused on her own words and the attention on her face. She raised it high, took a long sip, and smiled, basking in the approval. I brought my glass to my lips and tasted only simple juice, tart and cold. For a moment, I almost wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it really had been nothing. Then, 10 minutes later, as people settled into chairs, balancing plates and laughing over old stories, Anna's face changed. The color drained from her cheeks, and she pressed a hand to her stomach. She said something to her mother in a low, sharp tone. Denise looked worried and asked if she was all right. Anna tried to brush it off and said it must be something she ate, but she kept shifting in her seat. Sweat beaded at her hairline. Within minutes, she put her glass down hard on the table and stood up, face tight. She told the room she needed a moment and hurried down the hallway toward the bathroom, one hand on the wall for support. Her parents exchanged puzzled looks. Ralph muttered that she always overdid the holidays. Some cousins snickered and said she could not handle her own cocktails. No one seemed to think much more of it. Only Mark and I knew it was not the turkey or the wine. I watched the bathroom door close and listened to the sound of running water behind it. I felt no pleasure, only a strange mix of fear and cold clarity. Whatever she had put in that bottle had been meant for me. It was now working on her. Emma climbed into my lap and leaned against my chest, asking if Mommy was okay. I told her that sometimes people's stomachs did not like too much food at once. It was the truth, even if it was not the whole truth. My hands were steady on her shoulders, but inside, a small, hard knot formed where my old trust in Anna used to sit. While Anna stayed in the bathroom, Denise fussed around the kitchen, complaining softly that the evening was being ruined. Ralph poured himself another drink. Some guests drifted back to the table to pick at dessert early. The room's noise grew uneven, half forced cheer, half uneasy whispers. Through it all, Mark stayed near the edge of the room, watching everything. When Emma slid off my lap to show her new toy to her other grandparents, Mark moved closer and sat beside me on the couch. He kept his eyes on the tree for a while, as if we were just 2 people enjoying the lights. Then he leaned slightly toward me, his voice low and flat. He told me he had seen what Anna did in the kitchen, and that he had been saving things for a long time. He said he was done pretending it was all jokes and stress. He told me that I should not worry tonight, that no one would touch me or my drink again. I felt my throat tighten, not from fear this time, but from a tired kind of relief. For the first time in a long time, I realized my son had not been as blind as I thought. Then he added something that made the hairs on my arms rise again. He told me that tomorrow, on Christmas Day, he was going to reveal the real truth about what Anna had been doing and planning. He said he would not do it in anger, but in front of the whole family, with everything clear. As he spoke, my phone buzzed softly in my pocket. When I later pulled it out in the hallway, away from the crowd, I saw that he had created a new calendar event on my phone called Family Talk, set for the next day at 1 p.m. at his house. I stood there looking at the small screen, hearing the muffled flush of the bathroom down the hall, and understood that the quiet man everyone thought they could push around was not the only one who had finally reached his limit. When I lay in bed that night back in my small apartment, the sound of Emma's laugh and the image of Anna clutching her stomach kept circling in my mind like a bad loop. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when exactly things had shifted, when my own son's wife had started treating me like a problem to solve instead of family. It was not always like this. When Mark first introduced Anna to us, my wife was still alive. We had them over for Sunday dinner, and Anna showed up with flowers and a store-bought pie she apologized for, saying she was not as good a cook as she wanted to be. She called me Mr. Hale at first, then quickly switched to Peter when my wife told her I was not that formal. She asked questions about my work at the school, listened when I told old stories about leaky roofs and snow days. Back then, I saw a young woman who loved my son and wanted to fit in. My wife even pulled me aside in the kitchen and whispered that Mark had picked well, that Anna seemed bright and kind. I had agreed. When my wife got sick, everything slowed down and blurred together. The hospital visits, the late-night phone calls, the bills, the empty chair at the table after she was gone. Through that time, Mark tried to be there, juggling work and his new marriage. Anna came to the hospital a few times, bringing coffee or a small blanket. She hugged me at the funeral and cried real tears. I do not forget that. In those months, she felt like part of the support, holding me up. After my wife passed, the house felt too big and too quiet. Mark and Anna were living in a small rental then, with their first baby on the way and money always tight. I suggested they move in with me for a while, to save for a place of their own. It felt like the right thing to do. The first months were almost comforting. Baby things filled the living room, there was always someone in the kitchen, and I could help with night feedings when Mark and Anna were exhausted. We shared the mortgage and bills, and on paper it all made sense. Somewhere along the way, though, the feeling shifted. At first it was small things. Anna would move my tools from the hall closet because she said they looked cluttered. She would roll her eyes when I asked where she had put something. She started calling my old armchair that ugly thing and suggesting it might be time to update the space. I told myself it was just generational differences. Young people like new furniture and open shelves. Old men like their things where they can reach them. I tried to be flexible. Then one day I came home from a job at the school and found my bedroom different. My wife's quilt had been taken off the bed and folded into a plastic container for safekeeping. The photos on the nightstand were gone. In their place, there was a neutral bedspread and generic pictures that looked like they came from a home store. Anna told me, in a cheerful tone, that she had taken the chance to update the guest room while I was out. I stood in the doorway with my tool bag still in my hand and realized she no longer saw that room as mine. She saw it as a space to stage for visitors. My clothes were still in the closet, but it felt like I was borrowing the room now. When I mentioned it quietly to Mark later, he said Anna meant well and that she was just trying to make the house nice for everyone. He asked me not to make a big deal out of it because pregnancy had her on edge. I swallowed my hurt and let it go, like I did many times after that. At church and at the community center, where we sometimes went for holiday potlucks, Anna started making jokes that got little laughs. She would say things like, "Dad gets lost in his own kitchen if we move the sugar," or "We have 2 kids and one extra big kid who forgets where he put his glasses every 5 minutes." People would chuckle, and she would grin like a comedian who landed a good line. I told myself that families tease, and some jokes are harmless. But the jokes kept leaning in one direction, always painting me as confused, clumsy, or in the way. I could live with being the slow one, the one who forgot a word or a name once in a while. Age does that. What cut deeper were the private things I overheard when she thought I was not there. One night, I walked past the partly closed door to the nursery and heard Anna on the phone with a friend. She said she loved Mark, but felt like she had married into a retirement home. She called me dead weight, said it would be easier if I just went to one of those places with nurses so they could use the house properly. She laughed and said they needed to push me to sign some papers before I became a legal problem. When I stepped away, my legs felt weak, but I told myself I had misheard. People talk big when they are stressed, I said in my head. I did not want to believe my own daughter-in-law saw me as a burden to move around on a board. After Emma was born, and then a few years passed, things outside the house changed too. Social media became Anna's main world. She posted pictures of perfect breakfasts and family outings, always with herself centered, and Mark and Emma arranged like props. I started to notice memes and captions that made me feel small, even though my name was not written. Once she posted a photo of 3 pairs of shoes by the door, 2 adult, 1 tiny, and wrote that she had 3 kids, if you count my father-in-law, who cannot work the TV remote. People commented with laughing faces and little hearts. Mark showed it to me once, half amused, half uneasy. I forced a laugh and said I could learn the new remote if someone would show me. Inside, I felt like a man whose chair had been taken away at the table, but who was still allowed to stand in the corner and clap. When their second child was on the way, the pressure about the house grew. Anna said they needed more space, that my things took up too much room, that it would be easier if I moved into a senior complex with activities. She framed it as concern for me, saying I would make friends there. But her eyes always lit up when she talked about finally using the master bedroom and knocking down walls. Mark tried to stand between us sometimes, saying they could make it work with everyone still there. But he did not push back hard. He always slipped back into silence when Anna started to cry or raise her voice. I noticed a pattern. In public, I was the gentle joke, the old man who could not keep up. In private, I was a problem Anna wanted to solve by moving me out and, if possible, getting her hands on whatever money or rights I still had. The worst part was that I helped build this pattern by always choosing peace. I said yes to things that hurt because I did not want to be the father who yelled. I told myself Mark was under pressure and that with time, things would settle. But time did not fix it. It just gave Anna more room to grow bold. Lisa, my younger daughter who lived in another city, started to notice the tone on phone calls and holiday visits. She would come for a weekend and feel the cold air in the kitchen when Anna talked to me. She once pulled me aside and asked if I was okay, if I wanted to come live near her. I brushed it off and said I was fine, that Anna was just stressed and that Mark was doing his best. Lisa did not look convinced. She told me gently that just because I was used to being strong did not mean I had to let people walk over me. I heard her, but I did not know what to do yet. Then there were the subtle moves around my health. Anna began telling people that I was slowing down and forgetful. She insisted on coming along to doctor appointments, answering questions for me, telling the doctor I lost things and mixed up dates. She spoke as if I was not in the room. I remember sitting there once, my hands folded, while she said I had almost left the stove on, when in reality she had bumped the knob herself and laughed it off. The doctor looked at me with a calm, searching gaze and asked me directly how I felt. I answered clearly, listing my medications and their doses, reciting dates of tasks I had done without a pause. The doctor nodded and said my memory was strong for my age, that we all needed to watch for slips, but that I seemed in control. Anna's lips tightened, and she joked that I must have had extra coffee that day. On the drive home, she complained that older people were always in denial about their decline and that she was just trying to be proactive. Later, I overheard her telling her mother on the phone that the doctor was lazy and that they would have to push harder to get me placed somewhere safe. Each time, I did nothing. I told myself pushing back would only make her meaner, and I did not want to split Mark's loyalties. I also still believed some part of her might remember those days from the hospital when she had brought me coffee and blankets. I held on to that image like a man holding an old photograph that no longer matches the person in front of him. There was one night that stood out like a warning bell I kept trying to ignore. We were all at a church hall potluck, sitting at long tables with plastic tablecloths and paper plates. Someone made a toast about family, and Anna, already warmed by a couple of drinks, laughed loudly and said, in front of the whole group, that we needed to get Dad into a good home before he sets the kitchen on fire or sues us for negligence. The whole table went quiet for a second. Then a few people chuckled in that uncomfortable way people do when they are not sure if something is actually funny. I felt my face flush. I said nothing, just stared at the potato salad on my plate. Mark, sitting beside her, gave her a quick look but did not say anything either. Later, at home, I heard him tell her softly that the joke had gone too far. She shot back that she was the only one thinking ahead about safety and that everyone else was blind. Another time, she joked about kidnapping his wallet before he forgets what money is. She said it with a smile, but I noticed the way her eyes lingered on the folder where I kept my bills and papers. Even then, I still tried to be the easy one. I took pride in paying my share, in fixing things around the house, in watching the kids so they could go out. I thought that if I stayed useful, I could not be pushed aside. I was wrong. The last clear warning before that Christmas came at a tense family dinner on a different night. Lisa had come into town, and we all sat around the table. The conversation turned, as it often did, to space and money. Anna complained about how crowded the house felt, about school zones, about how they could not get the kitchen remodel she wanted while I still lived there. She sighed dramatically and said maybe it was time to start looking at assisted living for Dad before something bad happens, and we are stuck. She said it loudly, in front of Lisa, in front of Emma, who looked confused, in front of Ralph and Denise, who nodded as if it was common sense. The words hit me like a cold wave. I saw Lisa's face go tight, her fork frozen over her plate. I looked at Mark. He stared down at his food, jaw clenched. Under the table, his phone screen lit up. I did not know what it said then, but later, after everything broke open, he showed me. It was a message from Lisa, sent right there at the table. It said, "How long are you going to let her talk about our father like that?" And then another one. "He is not a burden. You two are." At that dinner, I just saw Mark glance at his phone and shove it back into his pocket. He told Anna gently that we should discuss things privately, not at the table. She rolled her eyes and said no one wanted to discuss ugly realities, then changed the subject. I tried to swallow my food past the lump in my throat, pretending the bite tasted like something other than shame. Looking back, that dinner was the moment the cracks started to show in Mark's patience, even if he did not act yet. Months later, watching him swap those glasses on Christmas Eve, I understood that the quiet boy I had raised was finally waking up to the noise I had been trying not to hear. The morning after that Christmas Eve, I woke up before my alarm, the pale winter light leaking around the edges of the blinds in my small apartment. My body felt heavy, like I had not slept at all, and for a moment I wondered if maybe there had been something in my drink after all. Then I remembered the clean taste, the way Mark's hand had moved, the way Anna had clutched her stomach and run down the hall. My head was clear. It was not my body that was tired, it was my mind. I lay there listening to the radiator tick and thought about all the times I had chosen silence instead of conflict. I had told myself it was strength. That morning, it started to feel more like surrender. I made coffee and sat at the small table by the window, looking down at the street where people walked dogs in puffy jackets and kids pulled sleds over dirty snow. My phone sat on the table, face up. The calendar reminder Mark had created the night before blinked at me. Family talk, 1 in the afternoon at his address. It felt strange to see my son's decision written there on my screen, like an appointment at a doctor's office for something I did not yet understand. I thought about canceling, about staying out of it, letting him handle his own marriage. But then I saw Emma's face in my mind, the way she had asked if her mother was all right, the way her small hand had trusted mine. I also remembered Anna's words in the clinic, in the hallway, at the table, building a story where I was confused and dangerous to myself. If I stayed away now, that story would grow without any resistance. I could not let that happen. At mid-morning, my phone rang. It was Lisa. Her voice came through the speaker with that mix of concern and sharpness that had become familiar in recent years. She said Mark had messaged her the night before, just a short note saying he had finally seen something he could not ignore and that he was going to confront Anna today. Lisa asked me if I was all right and if I was really going to be at that talk. I told her, as calmly as I could, about the kitchen, the small bottle, the glasses, and Anna's sudden rush to the bathroom. I admitted that if Mark had not moved, I might have been the one gripping the sink. There was a pause on the line long enough for me to hear her breathing. Then she said she was not surprised. She said she had watched Anna get bolder every year, and that she had been waiting for something like this. She told me gently that this was not just about hurt feelings anymore. It was about safety and control. She said she wished she could be there in person, but she had a shift at the hospital. She asked me to promise I would not sign anything, no matter what they said at that talk, before getting legal advice. I promised. After we hung up, I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw an older man with more lines on his face than he remembered, gray hair and tired eyes. But I also saw someone who had gotten up every day for decades to turn broken things back into working ones. I realized that if I treated my own life like the broken pipe in the school basement, I would not just stand there watching it leak while someone else put tape over it and called that a fix. I would shut off the water, call the right people, and make sure things were safe. That thought settled somewhere deep and steady in my chest. Around noon, I put on my good sweater, the one my wife used to say made me look reliable, and my winter coat. I took a folder from the metal box where I kept my important papers. I did not open it. I just slid it into my bag. It held copies of my house title, my will, and old bank statements. I did not know yet what I would do with them, but having them close felt like carrying tools to a job. On the bus to Mark's house, I watched people come and go, faces buried in scarves and phones. No one knew that inside one ordinary man's bag sat the proof that he was not as powerless as his daughter-in-law believed. When I stepped off the bus and walked down the familiar street toward my old house, my stomach twisted. Even from the sidewalk, I could hear voices inside, a high, excited tone that could only be Anna's and the lower hum of multiple conversations. The front yard decorations still glowed from the night before, though the snow around them had turned to gray slush. I paused at Ruth's house, the neighbor who had lived there as long as I had. She was at her window, and our eyes met. She gave me a little wave and a look that said she remembered the scene in the yard a few months earlier, when the shouting about assisted living had spilled out onto the street. Her simple, steady gaze gave me more courage than any speech could. I nodded back and continued up the path. Mark opened the door before I could knock. His face looked drawn, but his eyes were clear. He stepped aside, hugged me quickly, and told me everyone was already there. He said in a low voice that he needed me to stay calm, to let him speak first, and that he would not let anyone talk over me this time. I told him I understood. In the living room, the scene looked almost like a copy of the night before, but there were small differences. The tree lights were still on, but some of the ornaments had shifted, like someone had brushed past them in a hurry. The table was set for brunch, with plates of eggs, sweet rolls, and fruit. Emma sat on the floor with a new doll, making it sit and stand in stiff movements. Ralph and Denise sat squeezed into the sofa, cups already in their hands. Anna moved around the room with a bright smile, but there was a faint pallor under her makeup and a tightness around her mouth. When she saw me, she called out that she was glad I could join them now that your stomach has settled. The words were framed as concern, but the tone had an edge. I nodded and said I was feeling fine. Mark watched the exchange carefully. He said we would eat first and then talk. As we sat and passed dishes, Anna filled the air with chatter about sales at the mall, a new show she liked, and how they were thinking about big changes in the new year. She did not look at me much. Once, when Emma asked if Grandpa could come live with them again, Anna laughed in a light, thin way and said they would see what made the most sense. The room went quiet for a second. Mark told Emma they would talk about living arrangements later and changed the subject. After we finished eating, Mark stood and cleared his throat. He said he wanted everyone to move into the living room near the tree because he had something important to say. Anna's face lit up like someone had turned on another set of lights. She whispered to her mother that this was what she had been telling them about, that he had finally agreed to their plan. I pretended not to hear. We rearranged ourselves on chairs and the couch. Emma climbed into my lap. Anna took her usual place near the armchair, smoothing her dress, expectation in every line of her body. Ralph joked that it sounded like an engagement announcement, and Denise laughed. Lisa's face watched us from my phone in my pocket as an unread message icon. She had texted again, saying she was thinking of me. Mark stood in front of the tree, hands clasped. For a moment, he looked like the little boy he used to be on school play stages, trying to remember his lines. Then his shoulders squared, and his voice came out steady. He said he had called this talk because things in their family had gone off track, and he could not stay silent any longer. He talked first about me, about how I had opened my home to them after Mom died, how I helped with night feedings and bills, how I had kept working past retirement age to make sure they were comfortable. He said he had allowed jokes to go too far, and that he was ashamed of how he had sat quiet while others made me feel small. Anna shifted in her seat, the smile freezing. She tried to interrupt, saying he was making it sound worse than it was, that everyone joked about family. Mark held up a hand, not rudely but firmly, and said he was not talking about harmless jokes. He said he meant the way she had told people I was confused, the way she had pushed for papers to control my decisions, and the way she had planned to humiliate me with that drink the night before. The room's air changed. Ralph frowned and asked what he was talking about. Denise put her cup down too fast, spilling a bit on the saucer. Anna's cheeks flushed. She said that was ridiculous, that she had just been playing around, that she had not put anything harmful in the glass, and that she was the one who got sick. She laughed in a brittle way and said, if anything, she was the victim. Mark did not get louder. He stayed in that same low, even tone. He said he had seen her take a bottle from the drawer, add drops to one glass, and look over at me. He said he had swapped the glasses because he did not trust her joke. He said he had months of messages and posts where she talked about getting me placed somewhere, about using my house, about me being one paperwork away from letting them live like they wanted. Anna's eyes flashed. She told him he was twisting things, that he was stressed, that he was making a private argument into a public scene. She insisted that nothing she had done had been serious, that she was just trying to protect everyone. Emma looked up at us, confused, clutching her doll. I felt her small body tense on my lap. My instinct was to tell Mark to stop, to protect Emma from the adult mess, to protect Anna from complete embarrassment in front of her parents. But then I thought about the bottle, the clinic, the church hall, the night she called me dead weight. I thought about how my silence had protected her image again and again, while my own dignity bled out in small, invisible drops. So I stayed quiet and let my son speak. Mark said calmly that he did not believe Anna's excuses anymore. He said he had been saving screenshots and old videos, not because he wanted to hurt her, but because he knew one day she would claim it had all been jokes or misunderstandings. He said that day had come. He also said, in a voice that trembled only once, that he was done letting his father be treated like an open wallet and a babysitter waiting to be put in storage. Ralph tried to stand up, saying this was not the time or place, that couples should deal with their problems in private. Mark turned to him and said that when someone tries to drug a member of the family, it stops being a private problem. The word drug hung in the air like a bad smell. Anna stood up then, voice rising, saying he was accusing her of something criminal, that he would ruin her life if he kept talking like that. She said she had only wanted me to relax because my nerves were bad, that it had been a mild sedative, that she had meant to ask the doctor about it. The more she tried to explain, the more tangled her words became. Denise put a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. Emma began to cry quietly, not understanding but sensing that the safe shape of her world was warping. Mark's face looked like it might crack, but he gathered Emma into his arms and told her, in a gentle tone, that grown-ups were having a serious talk and that she could go play in her room for a little while. She did, dragging her doll along the floor, glancing back at me with wet eyes. When she was gone, the room felt colder. Mark took a deep breath and said he was not guessing about any of this. He said he had records, that he had spoken to someone who knew how these situations looked from the outside, someone who had explained my rights and his. He did not use big legal words. He just said he and I were no longer going to pretend that this was normal. As he spoke, my hand moved almost on its own to the edge of my bag, feeling the stiff edge of the folder inside. For the first time, I did not think of those papers as old memories. I thought of them as a shield I had never actually lifted. Mark looked at me then and asked, in front of everyone, if I wanted to say anything. I stood slowly, joints clicking, and felt all their eyes on me. I did not give a long speech. I said I had heard what he said, that I had seen what happened in the kitchen, and that I was done pretending that I was confused or helpless. I said simply that I was going to get proper advice and that I would not sign away my life for anyone's comfort. Anna opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, Mark said there was one more step he wanted to take. One more person he wanted to bring into the conversation. He said he had asked someone to look at everything and explain it in simple, clear words. He walked over to the TV, picked up the remote, and glanced at me. I knew then that whatever came next would not be another round of family drama. It would be the start of something formal, something that did not bend to tears or raised voices. Mark walked to the TV with the remote in his hand, and for a second I thought he was going to cast some video right then, in front of the tree, and blow everything open. Instead, he lowered the remote again and turned back to the room. He said that before he showed anything, he wanted everyone to hear from someone who was not family, someone who could speak without emotion. He took his phone from his pocket and said he had already reached out to a lawyer friend to ask what this kind of situation looked like from the outside. The word lawyer made Anna stiffen. She laughed in a high, strained way and said he was being dramatic, that involving strangers over a misunderstanding was going way too far. Ralph agreed loudly, saying family matters should stay in the family. Mark ignored them. He put his phone on speaker and called. The room fell quiet as it rang. A calm female voice answered, and Mark introduced her as Ms. Patel, an attorney he knew through a coworker. He said they were on speaker in his living room and that he wanted her to explain, in simple terms, how things might look if someone tried to push an older relative into a home and messed with their medicine or drink without consent. Ms. Patel did not give names. She just described the situation in general, in plain language. She said that putting anything in someone's drink without their knowledge could be very serious, especially if it was a sedative or medication. She said encouraging doctors to see an older person as confused or incompetent based on exaggerations could be considered a form of abuse or manipulation. She said joking about it publicly while making private plans to get access to their assets was a red flag. As she spoke, Anna's face went pale, then red. She kept trying to interrupt, saying none of this applied, that she had only wanted me to rest. Ms. Patel's voice stayed steady. She said that from a legal point of view, intent and pattern both mattered, not just whether someone got sick one night or not. She said that if an older person was still able to clearly explain their own affairs, had paid their own bills, and understood their choices, then they had the right to stay in their home and control their money unless a court found otherwise. She ended by advising, in that same quiet tone, that everyone take a breath, step back from the argument, and seek proper, private meetings if changes to living arrangements or wills were being discussed. She reminded them that any documents should be reviewed by an independent lawyer chosen by the older person. When she finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. Mark thanked her and ended the call. Anna tried to brush it off, saying he had made the whole thing sound worse when he told her, that no real lawyer would see a loving wife trying to help as a problem. But her voice shook. Ralph muttered that this was getting out of hand. Denise dabbed at her eyes and said no one was thinking about how hard Anna worked. Mark let them talk for a minute, then raised his voice just enough to cut through. He said he was not going to argue in circles on Christmas Day. He said that from now on, nothing would be decided based on jokes or pressure or late-night conversations. He said he and I would set up a proper meeting with Ms. Patel in the coming days, and that until then, there would be no discussion of assisted living, power of attorney, or moving me out. He looked directly at Anna and added that if she tried to push it behind our backs, all those saved messages and videos would be on the table. Anna stared at him, eyes wide, breathing fast. She asked if he was really threatening her in front of her parents. He said he was not threatening, he was setting a boundary. Then he turned to me and said that, For now, we should all take space. He asked if I wanted a ride home. I looked around the room. Emma's abandoned doll on the carpet, the half-empty plates, the Christmas tree trying to keep up the illusion of peace. I said yes. On the drive back to my apartment, the car was quiet. Snowflakes drifted against the windshield, catching the light from street lamps. I finally asked Mark why he had waited so long to do this. He gripped the steering wheel and said in a low voice that he had been afraid. Afraid of breaking his family, afraid of being alone if Anna left, afraid of being the bad guy for choosing his father over his wife. He said he had made himself believe the jokes were just jokes, even when his stomach twisted. The drink incident had broken something in him. When we reached my building, he parked and turned off the engine, but stayed sitting. He said he was serious about the lawyer, that he had already arranged an appointment for the following week. He asked me to bring any papers I had. House deeds, will, bank information. I nodded and told him about the folder in my bag. We sat there for a while in the dim light of the dashboard, like two men on the edge of something we could not go back from. In the days after that, life felt strange, like the world had jumped tracks, but the scenery had not caught up yet. Anna did not call me. Ralph and Denise stayed silent. Lisa texted often, asking for updates, urging me to follow through. Emma sent me short voice messages through Mark's phone, saying she missed me and asking when we could build a snow fort again. Each time I listened, I felt both grief and resolve. I spent a whole afternoon at my small kitchen table going through my papers. I laid out my house title, my will, old bank statements, and a folder with notes from the school district about my pension. I saw my name, written neatly in ink and typed letters, on document after document. For years, I had thought of those papers as something I kept in case of emergency, like a fire extinguisher on the wall. Now I understood that they were also a kind of quiet power I had never used because I did not want to hurt anybody. Mrs. Gomez, my neighbor, knocked on my door that week to bring me a container of soup. She said she had seen the cars at Mark's house on Christmas and had guessed there might have been drama. She did not ask for details. She just said she had heard Anna talk once about finally convincing you to move out, and that it had not sat right with her. She told me she thought I was still sharp, that I helped people in the building with small repairs and remembered everyone's names. She said not to let anyone make me feel like a crazy person. Her simple words steadied me more than she knew. The day of the meeting with Ms. Patel, I took the bus across town with my folder in a worn briefcase. Mark met me outside the building, coat collar up against the wind. Inside, the law office was warm and quiet, with framed certificates on the walls and a small plant on the reception desk. Ms. Patel greeted us with a firm handshake and an open, interested expression. She did not talk down to me. She invited us into a small conference room and asked me to tell my story in my own words. I started at the beginning, moving in together after my wife died, the jokes, the changes to my room, the talk about assisted living, the doctor visits, the church hall toast, the drink on Christmas Eve. Mark added details about the messages, the posts, the comments his coworkers had seen. Ms. Patel listened carefully, taking a few notes, but mostly watching our faces. When we finished, she took a breath and said that what we described fit patterns she saw in cases of elder financial abuse and coercion. She said it was good that we had caught it early, before any documents had been forced on me. She asked to see my folder. I slid it across the table, feeling oddly like a student handing in homework. She reviewed my house deed, my will, my pension papers. She looked up and said, in simple words, that I still had full control over my property and my money. She said no one could move me against my will or sign for me unless a court declared me incompetent, which did not match what she had seen of my memory and clarity. Then she turned to Mark and said he needed to be clear about what he wanted. Did he want to stay married as things were? Did he want to separate? Did he want Anna to still have access to joint accounts that might affect my care later? Mark looked tired, but he did not hesitate. He said he wanted his father safe and respected first. He said he did not know yet what his marriage would look like after this, but he could not keep pretending nothing was wrong. Ms. Patel nodded and told him there were steps he could take to protect himself and the kids financially without making sudden, dramatic moves. She explained, still in broad terms, how joint cards could be paused, how new accounts could be opened in his name, how any big decisions about the house and my living situation should from now on be put into writing and reviewed. She did not push us to act that minute. She said we should take a few days to think, and in the meantime, keep collecting any messages, posts, or comments that showed Anna's attitude. When we left her office, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I finally knew, in clear words, that I was not at the mercy of Anna's plans. Heavier because I saw, plainly now, how much work it would take to untangle the mess. On the way back to the bus stop, Mark and I stopped in a small cafe. Over coffee, he told me he had already started a folder on his phone with screenshots and that he was going to set up a camera in the kitchen at his house for safety. He said he wanted clear proof of how Anna spoke when she thought I was not listening. I asked if he was sure he wanted to live like that, recording his own home. He said he already felt like he was walking on eggshells every day anyway. At least this way, the eggshells might tell the truth. Over the next week, small things kept happening that added to the pile. Anna posted another picture online of a cluttered room, calling it the sad reality of living with aging parents who cannot keep up, even though the blankets in the photo were mine and the room was in my old house. Mark quietly saved it and said nothing. She told her mother on speakerphone, not knowing he was in the hall, that she was this close to getting me to sign over some things once the right moment came. Mark recorded that too. Each little piece felt like another wire in a bundle that would eventually form a cable strong enough to pull the truth into the open. Toward the end of that week, Mark called and said Anna wanted to host another family evening soon, maybe for New Year's, to clear the air. I could hear in his voice that she imagined herself giving some kind of speech where she painted herself as the victim of misunderstanding. He asked if I would come. I asked if he thought it was safe. He said yes, because by then, we would not be walking in blind. He said Ms. Patel was willing to be on standby again, and that this time, if needed, they would not just speak in general terms. They would be ready to make things very, very clear. In the days between that first tense Christmas Day talk and the evening Anna tried to clear the air, life felt like I was walking across a frozen pond, hearing small cracks but not yet seeing the water. Outwardly, not much changed. I still went to the store, still took the bus, still fixed Mrs. Gomez's cupboard door when the hinge gave out. Inside, everything had shifted. I no longer saw myself as someone waiting for other people to decide my future. I saw myself as a man who had finally picked up his own tools. Mark called often. At first he spoke in a flat, tired tone, telling me that Anna was cycling between anger and tears. She claimed he had humiliated her, that he had chosen a narrative that made her look like a monster. She insisted she had only wanted to help with my nerves, and that everyone was making a big deal about nothing. Then she would slip and talk about how all her plans for the coming year had been ruined, how she would never get the house she deserved, how her friends would laugh at her for living with her husband's clingy father. Mark listened, took notes in his head, and then, when he was alone in the car or at work, called me and repeated the parts that mattered. He said she kept circling back to the idea that I would have to move out sooner or later, that none of this changed the basic fact that old people belong where they can be managed. Each time he said those words, I felt a small, cold anger settle further into place. It was not the hot anger that makes a man shout. It was the slow kind that makes him plan. A few days after our meeting with Ms. Patel, we went back to her office. This time, I did not feel like a man walking into an unknown building. I felt like a client returning to a known workshop where the tools were sharp and properly stored. She greeted us, asked how things had been at home, and listened without interruption while Mark explained Anna's reactions. Ms. Patel nodded and said that in her experience, people who felt control slipping often reacted with drama and denial. Then she turned to me and asked if I had thought about what I wanted to happen with my house and my savings, not just today, but for the rest of my life and for my grandchildren after. I told her I had thought about it every day since Christmas. I said I wanted two things: to stay in control of my own life while I was still able, and to make sure any money or property I left behind went to my grandchildren and my children in a way that could not be twisted by someone who saw me as a burden. She broke that down into practical pieces. She explained, again in simple terms, that my current will could be updated to reflect new instructions, that my house could be placed in a small trust where conditions were clear, and that someone I trusted could help carry out those wishes if I became too sick later. She did not push me, but asked clear questions. Did I still want Mark to inherit anything? Did I want Lisa involved in decisions? Did I want any protection around how funds were used for Emma and her sibling? Hearing her use their names in that context made my chest feel tight, but in a good way. It reminded me that this was not about punishment, it was about protection. I told her I wanted Mark and Lisa both to be involved, but with clear rules that no one could sell my home or move me without proper medical proof and agreement from both of them, and that Anna should never have direct control over my assets. Ms. Patel said that was possible. She described how, in broad strokes, she could draft documents that reflected those wishes. She said there would be witnesses and formalities, but she would walk me through it step by step, never slipping papers in front of me without explanation. I felt something ease inside me. For the first time, I felt like the ground under my feet was not entirely controlled by other people's moods. She also spoke to Mark about his own situation. She suggested he speak to a separate family lawyer about his marriage, about protecting his income, and about ensuring that any joint debt Anna might create later did not drag him down in a way that hurt the children. He nodded, face tight, and said he had already made one call on that front. Ms. Patel did not ask him to share details. She simply reminded him that he was allowed to draw lines, even as a husband, and that love did not mean letting someone endanger your parent. We left that meeting with no dramatic proclamations, just a quiet understanding that within days there would be new structures in place. She said she would call when the papers were ready to review and sign. I did not need to see them yet. Just knowing they were coming was like hearing the steady hum of a new boiler warming up in the basement, ready to keep the building stable when the next frost hit. Back at my apartment, I spent evenings going over old memories in my mind, but I did not let myself drown in them. I cooked simple meals, walked to the park when the sidewalks were clear, and answered Emma's messages when Mark let her call. She would tell me about school and snowmen and the funny way her teacher sneezed, then ask when we could bake cookies again. I told her we would, that grown-ups were sorting things out. I did not speak badly of her mother to her. Children remember more than we think, and I did not want my voice to be another weight on her small shoulders. One evening, as I sat in my living room with the lamp on low, Mark knocked on my door. He looked worn down, but there was a new steadiness in his posture. He sat at my table and told me that Anna wanted to host a New Year's Eve get-together, just a small family thing. She said she wanted to clear the air and reset the narrative. Those were her words, he said, not his. She had invited her parents again and a cousin or two. She had told them she wanted to explain how she had been misunderstood and show that she could forgive everyone for overreacting. Well, when he said that, my first instinct was to refuse. I pictured her framing herself as the injured party, painting me as confused and Mark as manipulated. I did not want to sit through another performance. Mark seemed to read my thoughts. He said he would not ask me to come if things were the same as before. He reminded me that now we had more than feelings. He had the video clips, the screenshots, the phone recordings, and soon we would have Ms. Patel's formal explanation of my legal position. He said he had installed a camera in the kitchen with full consent from him as the homeowner, one that showed the drawer where Anna kept her little extras, and the counter where she tended to talk freely when she thought no one was listening. He said he did not plan to trap her in some cruel sting, but he was done letting her control the story. He wanted this New Year's gathering to be on their terms, not hers. I asked if he meant to bring the lawyer in directly. He said yes, but not as a surprise. He had told Ms. Patel what Anna was planning and asked if she would be willing to be on standby for a call in case the conversation turned to my living situation or my will. Patel had agreed, saying that sometimes hearing a calm, outside voice in the moment made it harder for people to twist facts later. I sat with that for a few minutes. The idea of my private life being discussed in front of a camera and a lawyer made my stomach flutter, but I knew that without structure, everything would just slide back into old grooves. I thought of Emma's future, of Lisa's tight messages, of the version of me that Anna had been broadcasting to the world. I told Mark I would come. The days before New Year's moved strangely slow. I got a call from Ms. Patel confirming that the drafts for my updated will and trust were ready for review, and that we would go over them together after the holiday. She did not list every clause on the phone, just reminded me that nothing would be final until I understood and agreed. That promise mattered. It meant that while things were already in motion, I still had a say at every step. Mark told me quietly that he had opened a separate account for his paycheck and that he had spoken to his bank about placing extra verification on joint withdrawals. He said Anna did not know yet. He wanted to have everything lined up before the inevitable explosion. He also said he had met alone with a different lawyer about his marriage, not to file anything yet, but to understand his options. As he talked, I watched his face and realized that he was, in his own way, stepping out of a long shadow too. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully, not in anything flashy, just in the same good sweater and coat, clean jeans and boots. I slipped my worn briefcase over my shoulder, not because I expected to use the papers inside that night, but because they reminded me that my life was not just whatever happened in that house. It had roots and structure beyond Anna's reach. On the bus ride over, fireworks stands and decorations flashed past the window. People laughed, carrying bags of snacks and bottles. The whole city seemed to be preparing to celebrate a new beginning, but my mind was on a smaller, quieter new start in a single living room. When I reached the street, I saw more cars than usual parked nearby. Anna wanted witnesses, I thought. She wanted an audience for whatever story she was planning to tell. As I walked up the path, I noticed Ruth's curtains twitch. She peeked out, saw me, and gave a small nod. It felt like walking into a theater where the neighbor already knows the real script. Mark opened the door before I touched the bell. He gave me a quick, steady look, then glanced toward the living room and back to me, as if to say he was ready this time. I stepped inside, hung my coat, and followed him toward the sound of mixed voices and clinking glasses. The house was dressed up again, this time with silver streamers and a banner in the living room that said, "New Year, New Chapter." Anna stood near the coffee table, already in full hostess mode, laughing too loudly at something her cousin had said. Her parents sat on the sofa, cups in hand, eyes bright, ready for a show. The TV on the wall was on a menu screen, a streaming device cursor hovering over a folder Mark had named simply Files. My phone in my pocket vibrated once with a message that said Ms. Patel was standing by for a video call whenever we needed her, and as I moved further into the room, I noticed two younger relatives raising their phones, ready to film this big family reset. Before any of them understood what kind of reset it was going to be, Anna tapped her glass and began to speak about healing and misunderstandings, painting herself as a tired daughter-in-law who had only ever tried to help an aging parent. She said she forgave everyone for overreacting and that this year they would make tough choices about my living situation. Before she could continue, Mark stepped forward, took the remote from the coffee table, and said he needed to show everyone something first. He switched the TV input to the folder labeled Files and pressed play. The screen filled with the kitchen from Christmas Eve, clear as day, Anna opening the drawer, taking out the small bottle, glancing around, tipping drops into one specific glass, then smirking in my direction. The room went silent except for the sound of the recording. Next came her voice from another night, complaining on the phone about getting me to sign over some things and calling me one paperwork away from freeing up their life. Ralph cursed under his breath. Denise's hand flew to her mouth, and Anna began to stammer that it was out of context. Mark ignored her, answered Ms. Patel's incoming video call, and calmly asked her to explain, on speaker and in front of everyone, the updated documents we had signed that morning.